Yep, I can see that.
Awesome. Brilliant. Okay. So yeah, I mean, the first thing to say, I think from my side, is just thank you for having me back. I had to fish back through my through the photos on my phone, Tom, and I found this one of us at the RS offices sticking post-it notes on the wall, and it reminded me of what presentations used to be like. And I think I remember still in February things were quite normal the month after, but I think in March we all went into lockdown, and basically everyone's life changed for the next 2.5 years, didn't it? So so yeah, really nice to be with Agile Northants again. Really appreciate that. Maybe just give a quick introduction to myself. So as Tom said, I've been in IT for more than 20 years now. My background is very much technical. I joined, I started as a developer, then worked in analysis, design, a bit of architecture, and then moved on to managing a software development team at Worldline. Then I actually did a stint in risk management. And then more recently, as you said, Tom, I've been looking after the scientific community at Worldline. And it's quite an interesting kind of group of people. And our job really is to look forward at the future, understand what that's going to bring, and then understand what our clients need to be doing now in order to be ready for that future. So that's kind of what I'm focused on at the moment at Worldline. I see that Tom already got a pitch in for RS recruiting. I'm obviously going to do the same for Worldline. I mean, I would just say it's quite a challenging company. We expect quite a lot from people. And I think, we really expect people to use all their ingenuity and their skills to solve really interesting problems. But I also think it's quite a fun company, quite a nice company to work for. And if you go to worldline.com, you can see all the vacancies internationally that Worldline has available, and you can filter by whatever job you're looking for. And I promise that's the last bit of pitching I'll do for Worldline hiring. But if you're looking for a career change, then feel free to have a look there. And obviously, always happy to discuss things with people if you want to get in touch with me directly. So again, thinking back to when I last joined you, I was talking about DevOps. I was talking about enterprise DevOps and how to scale DevOps in an organization. And I think then I finished off by sharing this DevOps maturity assessment that I'd created together with some colleagues at Worldline and Atos. And what this assessment tool let you do was answer questions to see your level of maturity in 7 different areas of DevOps that we'd identified. So these were org structure, culture and incentives, team agility, automation, standardization, architecture and design, practices, and collaboration. And myself and someone called Chris Bainham-Hughes, who also worked on the assessment tool with me, we thought, okay, it's good, but actually it's still pretty difficult for people to understand where they should go next. What should they do to improve in any of these areas? And so we thought, why not write a book where each chapter basically gives you advice in each of these areas. So we started work and we divided it out, and I took team agility and he took automation, I think it was. But we basically hit a complete roadblock, and that was for 2 reasons. So I got maybe about halfway through the chapter and it was already huge, and Chris was having the same experience, and we were like, if we finish this, it's going to be like 1,000 pages long or 1,200 pages long. It's going to be a massive encyclopedia. But we also realized that if we finished it, it wouldn't appeal to anyone, because the kind of person that's really interested in organizational structure, for example, is not the same kind of person who's interested in how to design a RESTful JSON web service. And they're not the same people that are interested in methods like Scrum and Kanban. So we'd have this massive book, but actually it wouldn't really appeal to any one person in particular. So we kind of said, okay, it's not going to work. We call it failing fast, and we just parked it and put it to one side. And then I think about 6 months later, I was discussing it with Alan Kelly, and I think Alan Kelly has also presented at Northants Agile. So you're kind of the link between all of these different things as a group. And Alan was saying to me, look, books are changing, David, because in the 1990s, I guess before, books were big because you went and bought them from a bookshop, and they had one chance to persuade you that this was the one book you needed to buy that had everything in it. So you had to put everything that someone could possibly want to know about a subject in one big book. But he said now with kind of online book sales and digital books, what you're getting is much more targeted, shorter books that address a specific problem that someone's got. And in fact, hold on, let me have a look. So here I've got Rapid Development by Steve Mcconnell. I think it's a 1996 book. Steve Mcconnell, more recently telling you everything you need to know about Agile in a much smaller book. And what else have you got? Mike Burrows, who might have presented at Northants as well, thinking about it, but there's everything you need to know about Kanban. And you just see the idea of huge encyclopedic books is not it's not the way things work anymore. So having spoken to Alan, I thought, well, actually, maybe I could take what was going to be that chapter about team agility, and I could finish it and convert it into a book in its own right. And that is kind of what led to the birth of the book, Better Agile. So now to say a bit more about this, sorry, my cables have got a bit tangled up from moving and accessing my bookshelf. So obviously the origins of this are that assessment tool. And one of the things we did with the DevOps assessment tool is we tried to be completely independent of a particular practice or method. So to give you an example, we didn't ask, have you got a product owner, or are you delivering your work in sprints? Because those are Scrum specific terms. So we were asking general questions that anyone could answer that weren't testing whether you were using a particular method or a tool. And then as Chris and I started working on what was going to be the DevOps book, we also realized we were seeing a lot of kind of frustration with Agile, where people were trying to adopt a technique or a tool or a practice and not getting the benefits that they wanted. And I don't know, to give you an example, someone would go on a Scrum course, they come back and they try and make Scrum work in their environment, but it turns out they can't quite make it work. Maybe there isn't someone that can be a product owner, or perhaps they struggle to deliver a story in one sprint. And so then they start doing things like splitting stories across sprints, and they make changes which are kind of well-intentioned, but if you don't understand what's behind Scrum and like the principles that are making Scrum work, you can make these small changes and end up actually kind of making it ineffective. And so it's for that reason that in Better Agile, I decided to start with the kind of the principles of Agile, so how agility really works on a team. And that's what I've called the 3 secrets of Agile. But as the background to the book was also this idea of helping people improve for themselves, the other thing I've done is included lots of coaching questions. So the idea is, rather than trying to get people to change on your team or get your management to understand something by telling them what they should do, you can use the coaching questions to kind of drive improvements. So I also want to share with you, which I think Tom has already said, but you are the first audience to have the materials from the book presented to you by me. And I was thinking, well, you could see that as a great privilege, like you're at the red carpet premiere, or you could just think of yourselves more as guinea pigs. But I'll leave it up to you how you want to frame that. And I guess as well, because it was published in February, I've had the chance to get some first feedback. And I think what people have said to me is that it works well as a book for people quite new to Agile, because it's accurate, it's quite succinct, and it doesn't dive off straight into one method or technique. But it also works quite well for teams that have been using Agile for a while, but maybe they've run out of steam with making improvements to the way they're working. So in the talk, as I said, I'm going to give an overview of these 3 secrets, which are optimize for flow, get the right people working on the right things, and shorten feedback loops. And for each of these, I kind of want to explain why it matters, give you some ideas for how you might want to improve in that area, And I'll share with you a couple of the coaching questions from the book, but I can't share all of them because there's 55 of them in total and we'd be here all week. But first, as the origins of this book were that self-assessment, I thought it'd be really useful if we just take 5 minutes for you all to ask yourselves the questions that are the 10 questions that are at the end of the book that help you understand your level of agility today. Now, let's see if we can get this working. I think what's interesting to see here is that it's kind of what I expect is, in this group, I would say you're likely to be a fairly, above average group in terms of the level of agility of your teams, and by virtue of the fact that we're all at this event. But you still see that there's kind of a real mix of responses here. So some people have a potentially shippable product every 2 weeks, but quite a lot don't. Where do we have the metrics? So some teams are tracking some of these metrics, but some teams are not tracking any of them. Let's look a bit further down. The fast feedback loops. So again, how fast are your feedback loops currently? The most common response is, yeah, you've got some of them that quickly, but not all of them. Few teams have got all of them at that speed, and some haven't got any of these feedback loops in place. And again, I won't sort of go through individual responses, but what you'll tend to find is, of course, some teams are scoring higher, if that makes sense, overall, but most teams will find there's some areas that they can improve. And of course, it's the old trick is understanding a bit about where you are is the first step to understanding what you might need to do next to kind of improve further, to take it to the next level. Okay, so thanks for doing that. And hopefully it also kind of will set your frame of mind as we go through these Agile secrets. So now let me share my screen again. And that back. So as I said, I'd like to go through each of these principles in turn and share a little bit about what's behind them and what you might do to improve in those areas. So let's start with optimizing for flow. So I guess most of you are familiar with this idea that a software change goes through a series of steps. So we've got design, code, test, and release. And those steps might all be completed by the same person or the same team, or they might be completed by different people or different teams. But regardless, there's some time where someone is actively working on the change, and that's called the touch time. In between, you've got the time that the change is waiting for someone to work on it, and unsurprisingly, that's referred to as wait time. And then your total end-to-end lead time is the sum of the wait time and the touch time. Now, as a kind of side note, well, not a side note, sorry, your flow efficiency is the ratio of your touch time to the lead time. So you divide your touch time by the lead time. And in software development, it's not unusual to have a flow efficiency down at around 10% or even lower. So that means for the total time it takes to deliver a software change, only about 10% of that time is someone actively working on it. And it's one of the reasons I say to most teams, if you want to deliver software faster, you're far better off looking at how you can reduce the wait time rather than trying to get analysts or developers or testers or whoever to work faster, because the wait time, that's where you've got the biggest scope for improvement most of the time. So why in software do we have such a kind of low flow efficiency? Well, to me, one of the biggest reasons is having large batch sizes. And the other two are blockers and also, we've got blockers, batch sizes, and you'd think I'd know these off by heart since I wrote a book. Bottlenecks, of course, right. So let's start with batch sizes. So Donald Ranitson wrote about batch sizes in his book Managing the Design Factory, and he used this analogy of the airports. I don't know if people remember going on holiday abroad on an aeroplane, but when we used to do that, you all arrive at your destination on the plane, and that's a large batch process, a large batch step. And then you've all got to go through passport control, and that's a small batch process because it's checking one passport at a time. And what happens is you get queues because you've got everyone arriving in one go, and then you've got this process that processes individual people one at a time. So his advice was avoid large batch processes, and particularly avoid them before a small batch process. Let's work through this for more of a software example. So here I've tried to illustrate that you're developing software changes. So you're doing that continuously. So you develop one, then you develop the next one, or maybe you're doing 5 in parallel if you've got a team. Then once you've done a certain number of changes in one batch, you perform your system testing, and then in another batch, you release all of those changes into production. And you see that your average lead time is from halfway through the development to the end of the release step. So that's the average time it's taking to deliver a software change. Now have a look at what happens if we do the testing continuously. The interesting thing is, it doesn't actually reduce your average lead time at all, because you've still got that batch release step at the end. Now, I'll come back to feedback loops later. So continuous testing still has a benefit because it tells you about problems sooner. So that's still a useful thing to do, but it doesn't actually get your average lead time down in terms of reducing your batch sizes. Now have a look at if we add requirements into the mix. So if we do our requirements continuously, so we finish one requirement, hand it to a developer, and then we start work on the next requirement, hand that to a developer, you can see the average lead time goes up by roughly the amount of time it takes to analyze one requirement. But if instead you do all your requirements up front, and only when you've finished analyzing all your requirements do you start development, you see you have a massive increase in your average lead time that's completely out of proportion with the amount of time it takes to analyze one requirement. And this is kind of what Donald Rennerson was talking about, having a large batch step before a small batch process. And I kind of think this is interesting because there was definitely a stage where everyone was talking about continuous delivery, continuous deployment, continuous integration. And I always used to think, do you know what? We should be thinking about continuous requirements, because if you're still spending half a year defining all the requirements for a system before you even start development, then that's probably your biggest opportunity to improve your average lead times, not getting better at the other end of the process. It also reminds me, I don't know if some people have come across this term water scrum fall, where in some companies you do all the requirements as a batch, and then at the end you do the release as a batch, and in the middle you use Scrum to be really super agile. But again, the reality is if you bookend an agile process with 2 big batches, you are really limiting the benefit you get in terms of reducing your lead time. And then finally, let's look at if we do the continuous release and we do the continuous requirements, and you see that is the scenario where you get the best average lead time. So the shortest time from someone deciding that something needs doing to it actually being in production and delivering some benefit. So that's batch sizes. The next topic I wanted to come on to was bottlenecks, which also introduce wait time and therefore impact your lead times. So this concept, I don't know, so again, referring to my bookshelf, let's see how I've got it, the goal. A long time ago, Eliyahu Goldratt wrote The Goal, and it was a business novel. It was basically talking about how to optimize factories. And it doesn't directly apply to software development, I have to say. But if any of you have read the Phoenix Project, that was really an attempt to do the same, but then for a software context. And a lot of the kind of lean, agile philosophy has its roots in some of what Eli Goldratt was saying. So he had this idea of bottlenecks, and the principle of a bottleneck is that there's always one part of your development process that is limiting the overall throughput, and that's the bottleneck. I find it's useful to always talk about bottlenecks in terms of a step in the process rather than talking about a person being a bottleneck. So I don't know, let's think of an example where, let's say, preparing the software designs is the bottleneck. So taking an agreed requirement and converting that into a design for a feature. Let's say you've got one person doing that and they are really stretched, and you've got developers waiting for work the other side of them, and you've got requirements, a backlog of requirements piling up before them, then that step in the process is the bottleneck. And kind of the way I've described that also reveals something, which is when you're trying to spot these bottlenecks, queues are a really good indicator. Just like the passport control example. If you've got a big queue of work waiting before a step, and you've got people waiting for work after that step, then that's your bottleneck. The problem is that in some companies, and in fact with a lot of teams, everyone is overloaded. Everyone's got too much work to do. There are queues everywhere. And if there are queues everywhere, you can't really tell where your bottleneck is because it just doesn't show. And that's a reason why lowering your work in progress becomes really important. And I won't go into too much detail, but it's really something coming from Kanban, is the idea that you should reduce the total number of tasks that you have in progress at any one time. And one of the benefits of that is that it makes it much easier to see where the bottlenecks are. So once you've uncovered where the bottleneck in your process is, what can you do about it? Well, again, going back to the goal, there are these three strategies. The first is exploit the bottleneck. The second is subordinate everything else to the bottleneck. And the third is elevate the bottleneck. And I think the terminology is not very intuitive. So in brackets there, I've put my kind of version, which is to increase focus, increase support, and then increase capacity. So the first one, exploiting the bottleneck, this is essentially about making sure that you're getting the most out of the resources you have. So if you've got this one guy preparing the designs, then make sure they're not being interrupted. Make sure they don't have to do admin work. Basically give them as much, let them use as much of their time and their energy on completing this step in the process, which is the bottleneck. And even if that slows other people down, it doesn't matter, because the only thing slowing down your end-to-end process is that step. The second is subordinating everything else to the bottleneck. And what that means is essentially downstream, you've got developers, in our example, waiting for work. Take some of that capacity, use their time to support the person doing the designs. That could be by taking on some of the design work themselves. It could mean making sure the requirements coming to the designer are of a higher quality so that the design work can be done more easily or more quickly. But it's anything that you can do using the people that at the moment are either overproducing before the bottleneck or don't have things to do after the bottleneck to make sure that that step can be improved. And then the last one is elevating the bottleneck, so increasing capacity. And this is probably the crutch we all reach for, which is I need more people, I need more resources working on this. But elevating isn't just about more people. It can be training them in some new techniques or some ways of doing things faster, or it could be tooling that could help to improve it. And again, tooling might make a difference for design, but for testing or for release, tooling and automation can make a massive difference to your capacity without actually hiring someone. And the thing that's important to remember as well is that they're listed in this order because this is kind of the order you should work through. Elevating is always the costly, disruptive approach to alleviating a bottleneck. Exploiting is always the easiest. So the quick wins and the easiest things that you can do are always exploit, then subordinate, and then the last resort is kind of elevate if you absolutely have to.
David, could I ask a question? I think you partially answered it then, but I'm just gonna ask it anyway.
Go for it, Tim. Yeah, definitely.
So I've always found there's a little bit of a conflict between kind of some of these things and keeping stable teams, because if we want to elevate or even subordinate in some of these cases, we might need to bring in kind of expertise or people from other teams, and then that causes disruptions to those teams, and they don't have that stability in order to what would you say about that?
I think I don't know if this is going to answer the question, but I think it's really important to think about steps in the process, not the people or team. So I always say this with Kanban. When you put your columns up for a Kanban board, you should never think of it as the designers column or the coders column or the testers column. It's the value adding steps. And the problem is a bit because this terminology comes from a production line and a factory where it was people or machines at stations, we get a little bit stuck into thinking of that. But sorry to jump back, but if I come to this, when you talk about cross-functional teams and cross-functional people, one of the biggest reasons they improve your flow efficiency is because you get less wait time if the same person does everything. If I can speak to a customer, understand their requirement, design it, code it, test it, and then release it into production, maybe with a review at some point by someone else, the flow efficiency improves wildly. So I take your point that you sometimes have to, what you're saying is you need to bring people in from outside to support, and that's disruptive. But I would say the longer term goal is never that you have to bring someone in. You're aiming for a target state where you can have that kind of optimal flow without having to disrupt another team. But does that answer the question, Tim, or have I ducked it? Or maybe you can say more about your specific scenario.
No. I think that's answered the question. I think that's what we're always trying to do, is trying to kind of remove dependencies and improve the flow efficiency in individual teams. I think it's just scenarios where maybe priorities in one team mean that we do take people from another team just to deliver that project, for example. But then there's a knock-on effect on other kind of things that they're working on, and it slows that down. Yeah. Which I think Kanban absolutely kind of advocates for theory of constraints. But I think when we're talking about Agile and Scrum, we're talking about kind of that sense of stable teams, and I think we're disrupting the teams that are left behind, if that makes sense, sometimes. But I think what you're saying is actually work towards resolving that so that you don't have to bring people in.
If it's a common occurrence, then it might also be that your team organize, and this comes a bit more onto org structure, but like if one team can never deliver anything without needing something from another team, then it might be that there's a structural issue in how you're organized there, rather than, so, yes, you want stable teams, but you also want the right stable teams, if that makes sense, organized in the right way. Okay.
Yeah. The one I've always seen is the dreaded, you kind of gave the real hint there that those columns are supposed to be process, not people. But almost every team I've worked with for the last 3 years at some point has gone, oh yes, we need a QA column for the QA team, and we need a dev column for the dev team.
Yeah.
And then every retrospective, you have this conversation about why were there 27 tickets in the QA to test queue on the last day of the sprint, and the devs were twiddling their thumbs. And then you have the conversations about, oh, surely the dev can help with the testing, and that usually causes one of the testers to want to quit, or one of the devs to want to quit,
or both.
Or both, yeah. And it's really difficult to find teams that are prepared to be. People get given these hats, and they really want to stay with those hats on. They don't want to do the T-shaped people thing.
But I think that's where I like the kind of, the Kanban philosophy of, you don't change people's roles, but you make the work visible and the steps the work has to go through visible. And then I have seen cases where, like, a project manager will do a project management, for heaven's sake, will do testing.
Or a Scrum Master, I regularly do.
Or on my team, there was a developer who said, oh, I'll do the regression test. Because when you can see the tickets piling up, and it's like, well, someone needs to do that. But that only happens if you relentlessly don't map the roles onto those steps. And I do see, literally, sometimes I see organization design charts where people are doing exactly that. They are the defining teams around the steps. And to me, that's not I'm not saying it's the wrong approach, because everything is context dependent, but in general, you should be moving towards the team organizes around the work and they do what needs doing to get the work done.
Yeah, I would still rather have a test team and a dev team under one roof on one board than a separate test team and handing it over. Let's not even go there. Yeah. Thank you.
Although it also, to be fair, it speaks to the fact that, sorry, we could talk all night, but it also speaks to the fact that Scrum, and I did briefly mention it in my book, Scrum's not ideal if you can't have the cross-functional teams.
Yes.
And it's where Kanban can be better, because the thing is, with a Scrum, you artificially have the idea that all the steps have to be in a sprint, and you can't add something into the sprint until everything's been done. So if you have got devs and testers, you're right, you have very busy devs at the start and very busy testers at the end. Why can't the devs start on the next load of changes whilst the other changes are being tested? I think that's anyway, that's probably more than we can cover. So then I wanted to move on to the last one, which is blockers. So this is a little bit, there's a slight overlap here in that a bottleneck can be something that blocks work, but there are other sources of blockers. So the network connectivity goes down, someone's off sick, you're waiting for approval from a customer, whatever it is, there's plenty of things that can cause a work item to become blocked. And as soon as it's blocked, then it's not being actively worked on and your flow efficiency is going down. And I think the two practices that I think are useful for managing blockers better is, firstly, coming back to this point of limiting the work in progress, because let's say your team is working on 10 changes and one of those changes becomes blocked. It's really easy to then say, well, I'll start working on another one. Oh, and if that one becomes blocked, I'll start working on another one. And I'm busy and I'm always doing stuff and I don't really care about these blocked items. If you can't work on something else until you've cleared one of the things out of your backlog, then that's a much bigger incentive to actually resolve that blocked work item. And then the other thing is to, obviously you want to be identifying blockers, so you make them visible. So if you have a physical Kanban board, you might stick a sticker or put a dot next to a ticket every day. It's in the same column. I think in some software packages, you can make the tickets visibly age the longer they stay in one column. So that's good, and that encourages people to deal with them then. But also it's good keeping track of the different blockers that have occurred, and then occasionally in your retrospectives saying, well, this type of blocker is happening all the time. What could we do about that? And if Neil's still here, he'll remember, we, on our team, we used to have network outages all of the time, and we were developing via like a terminal. So if the network went down, you literally could do nothing. And we thought, well, we can't fix the network on our team, but what we can do is get everything set up on virtual machines running locally on our laptop, have distributed version control, and then when the network goes down, we can carry on working perfectly fine without it, and if you understand which blockers are frequently occurring, then you can kind of take those sorts of actions to improve the situation. So I'm just keeping an eye on the time, and I'm probably going to take too long. I did want to put up a couple of coaching questions. So I really like it if someone would come off mute and maybe give me an idea of what you think your team's flow efficiency might be, or what you think the bottleneck is in your software development lifecycle.
I'd just like to put up, so I work for a bank, and it's almost impossible to size a story because there are so many third parties who then become your bottleneck. And so, it's pretty much impossible to practice Scrum in the format I'm in. So we just have to really do the best we can. But yeah, we can have a story that we guesstimate would take about a week, 2 weeks, and it'd be 7-8 weeks before we deliver it, not at fault. And going back to should we start working on another story while we're blocked on this? Well, we have to, otherwise we won't get anything done because there's no one to chase at the end of the day.
That's really interesting. So are you saying that you estimated it 5 days, let's say, and it takes 7 weeks? And is that is that wait time that's making it take longer?
Yeah, so you'll have automated processes that fail, then you have to raise an instance off the back of that, wait for that team which hasn't got any resource to get back on to fix that, to get the automation to go on to the next thing. And then maybe 3 or 4 automated processes you're relying on, which are all outside of your sphere of influence. So, yeah, I mean, so what you're saying entirely in a proper engineering team makes sense, but in my scenario, unfortunately, I'm doing all the anti-patterns.
Yeah, and I have to say, you know, we live in the real world, which is probably
Oh, don't say that. Don't say in the real world, please. I can hear my Scrum trainer still going off on one 10 years after I did the course.
But I do remember it was one of those things where I wasn't sure I was totally happy with it. But at one point we had a kind of a pool on our Kanban board where if we really couldn't unblock something, tickets got moved into the pool, and that kind of took them out of the whip. And it wasn't ideal, but you know, at some point you have to do that. Because if you can make that visible to the stakeholders outside of the team, then that can also help, of course. And anyone got any other reactions to those questions?
I think probably 5%.
So five would be good. I think. If you're counting the time that something actually gets raised and entered into Jira or ADO, then I'll be lucky. I don't know how many decimal points I might actually need. I haven't worked it out. I mean, I know I've got tickets for some of the clients I've worked with over the last couple of years. I mean, the record was a 14-year-old ticket. So, but for the time it was entered, and it hasn't even entered the dev team yet. So does that count as part of that?
But I mean, it's interesting when you talk. I remember we used to think that a change estimated at 1 day of effort. Well, actually, sorry, a change estimated at 1 day of effort from the statistics most often took 3 weeks, so 15 days. So that's what, something like 0.75%. You know, it's 0.6%, but it's sorry, 6%. But you know, it's lower than 10%. So it sounds astonishing, doesn't it? How can something take 10 times longer than the actual effort? And yet, it's the biggest. It's absolutely normal in our industry, and the biggest opportunity for improvement. Okay, so if we come on to the next one, get the right people working on the right things. And I kind of think this sounds really obvious. And even more obvious is that to do this, you have to A, know what the right things are, and then B, make sure that the right people work on them. To me, there's 3 things that you have to have in place if you want to do prioritization effectively. The first one is capturing all your requests in one place. Now, usually on software teams, this is what you call the backlog, but I want people to be a bit careful because sometimes you might have like a product roadmap type of backlog, but it's not really capturing all the work the team is having to do. So sometimes the bug fixes or the estimates or the client meetings or the other things that people are having to do are not being captured in one place, and they can be really significant. The next thing is you obviously have to prioritize that backlog enough to know what the top priority items are, and you have to do that before people start working on stuff. And then the third one is actually making sure that people only work on those highest priority items first. And I think if you're doing these 3 things, you're probably way ahead of most software development teams. It's surprising how tough actually this is. And I guess the biggest challenge I've seen is on the last one, which is where, you know, someone has a request, they want it dealing with urgently, they walk straight up to a developer's desk and ask them to drop everything and start working on it straight away. And the thing is, developers will often do that, and they're not doing it maliciously. They're doing it because they think, well, this must be the most urgent thing right now, so I better do this. And also sometimes the people that are going directly, they might just be frustrated. You know, they might think, if I enter this into Jira or do whatever the formal process is, it'll take 6 months and never get done. So why wouldn't I go directly to someone to get the thing done quickly? But as I say, if people are if work is being allocated to a team in an entirely ad hoc way without having a view of everything and choosing the most important items, then there's no way that your prioritization is effective. And then the second challenge that I also think teams face is struggling with prioritization by basically giving themselves an impossible task, which is to have a whole backlog, which is changing every day with new requests coming in, perfectly prioritized all the time. And my suggestion there is, if your team's only going to work on 10 items, all you need to know is what are the top 10. Everything else doesn't matter. So you can probably figure out what the top 20 are without even much discussion or thought. Some of those are going to obviously be the highest priority items that you definitely need to work on. Some of them are obviously going to be lower priority, or you might not be able to start. Maybe you're working for, waiting for a client approval, or, it's dependent on another change. And so there should only be a few where you really have to do a bit of deeper thought or analysis. And when I was thinking about this, I even thought with those few, do you know what? If it's difficult, it can't even matter that much whether you choose one of those three to be the top or the bottom, because if it's that finely balanced, then it isn't going to be that critical. So my advice is, it's really important to have enough prioritization done so that someone always knows what the top priority task is. But that doesn't mean you have to have a whole backlog prioritized all of the time, which is basically impossible.
So just a quick question on that.
Yeah.
So if you do have a significantly large backlog, that there are many low priority items, which are completely at the bottom of the pile month after month after month after month, they become stale. What point or what process do you use to start pruning that out? So because, we've got 300 items in our backlog, and I'll just prioritize the top 20, as you say.
Yeah.
But you can't see the wood for the trees sometimes, and it's
you write a script that says, if item older than 3 months, delete item.
That's what I was going to say, exactly that. It's not been touched for a year. It's probably out there. I've spent years before trying to go through old backlogs when moving stuff into Jira or whatever we were doing. And you find that 2/3 of them, you can't even reproduce the problem anymore. In many cases, the screen they were referring to has got deleted anyway, or the data is no longer relevant. And past about a year old.
Was it? I remembered. So David Anderson gave this speech once at a conference where he said, teams prefer to passive aggressively accept work and then never do it than say no to things. And I almost can't bring myself to say it, but the reality is, if something hasn't been actioned, if nothing has been done about something for 3 months, it probably doesn't really matter. And you can't get away from that, because either someone would be pushing and chasing and shouting. I'm not totally not saying it's ideal, but the reality is, if things have sat at the bottom of a backlog for a long period of time, they cannot be that urgent. So again, it's whether you tell people that you do it with an automatic script or what you do, or whether you just somehow get them off your reporting, so that you're not having to look at them each time. But honestly, it's a waste of time to be looking to sift through those really old requests.
I'm interested in your take on this, David. What I did, I inherited a backlog which was about 100 items long, and that was a subset of a backlog which was about 1,000 items long. And so what I did some analysis of the team throughput, etc. And what we did was actually limited the team's backlog to 20. That other backlog didn't go away, but we would only replenish that smaller backlog once it started to reduce. And what that allowed us to do is obviously focus on only refining those items that were in that smaller backlog and not waste time refining the other ones. But also it allowed us to answer that question of when will it be done, because we could start looking at that kind of time from when it entered the smaller backlog to when it was done. Yeah. So we could tell people, actually, it's in that bigger backlog, no idea. When it's at a priority where it comes into here, we now understand our lead times from there. Yeah. So that's the strategy I used there.
Which I think is, you've got to, because again, just coming back to the probably a few slides, you have to know what the top priority items are, but you can't go through a list of 100 or 1,000 every day to check what's the the top priority. So as you say, this, I mean, maybe you do need to comb through some of the older ones periodically, but to be honest, really important things tend to get bumped up because someone cares about it, is the brutal reality.
I think just to add, maybe from my perspective, I tend to use maybe sometimes a state. So in your backlog software, whatever it is, define a state and park it. Because what I've found is a lot of people are reluctant to do the scripting method to delete stuff automatically, which is understandable.
Which was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but yes.
Yeah, of course it was. But the reason for that is probably because they are worried or have a sort of underlying fear that if those items were removed and or deleted, some of that stuff will be forgotten and, oh my God, we'll have lost some of that work. So just park it, put it on the side, and then get your backlog, never to show that, but you still have it available for you. Yeah. Should you need to dip into it.
And I think that's the thing. It's anything that keeps what you're actively looking at more manageable.
Yeah.
So the other question is, how do you get the right people? How do you then allocate these high priority items to the right people on the teams? And I don't know if people can put their hands up, but have some of you heard of real options and the book Commitment? No? Okay, so this is, this literally has had a huge impact on my life outside of software as well. When it's a graphic novel, actually. If you can get it, it takes about half an hour to read, and most of it is essentially a cartoon. But Chris Matz and Olaf Maassen, they explain real options. And they say real options have value, they expire, and you should never commit early unless you know why. So to give an example, you book a ticket for a flight, and a lot of people think, right, I'm now committed to taking that flight. But you're really not committed to taking that flight until you're on the plane and they've closed the doors and it's taxiing along to the runway. And what you've bought is the option to take that flight. And actually, if your ticket is partially refundable or you can change it to another date, the cost of the option isn't even the total ticket price. It's just the additional cost you'll incur if you have to get a refund or you have to change it. And if circumstances are changing rapidly and you're having to make decisions quickly, this is really helpful. And let me think, it was probably, well, it was 6 years ago. My dad was really ill, in and out of hospital, but he really wanted to go camping, and we thought it might be the last family holiday we had together. But it was like, well, can we book it? Because, will he be able to make it or not? We don't know. And I just realized, well, the option is the deposit for the campsite, which is £20. That option is worth £20 to me. The rest of the cost is irrelevant because we'll only incur that if we go ahead and do it. So you can think of lots of things as options, and it makes this sort of decision making much quicker. But in terms of resource planning, the key is to understand that options have a value. And so what you want to do when you're allocating people to work is try and reduce any key person dependencies that you have. So key person dependencies are the superheroes. You've got one person and they're the only person that can work on this part of the system, or they're the only person that can do a release, or they're the only people. And if they are on leave or, or they're not available for any reason, suddenly there's a big negative impact on what the team can do. And that's an example of not having options. So there is value in having options by getting some knowledge sharing going and making sure there's more than one person can do each task. And then the other thing with allocating people to work is you try and allocate the people with the fewest options first. So if you've got a new person who can only code in Java, well, you're going to have to find them something reasonably straightforward in Java. That's the only thing they can work on. So you allocate them first. And then you allocate the people that have got more skills, know more of the system, know other languages later. And then eventually you should try and keep the people who know the most and are most experienced essentially unallocated to mentor and support the other people, and also to help with emergencies. Because the thing is, if an emergency happens, you don't know what skill set you'll need. So the people that have the most flexibility to fill in different roles are the ones that you want to kind of keep back and have a bit of slack with. And it also comes back, Tim, to the point we made earlier about having people work on individual, having the same person working on the different steps, is that actually developing people to be more T-shaped or cross-functional really increases your number of options for your work allocation. So that's kind of my tip for how you allocate work, is think about who has the least options, allocate them first, and then work your way up to the people that have the most options, reserving some to just mentor and help other people on the team. So now again, a couple of coaching questions, and I'm just mindful of time. So I don't know if a couple of people want to venture an answer to one of these.
I think mine's to the top one, David, about stakeholders outside adding things to the backlog. It'd be through the PO or product owner and product manager. It normally comes through them rather than it being people just free for all adding stuff.
And do you find they do generally go via the product owner? Is that pretty well enforced?
Yeah, I'd say so. There's normally to me it feels like a kind of, I suppose they perceive it as respect. Is, it seems respectful to go through the product manager, product owner, so they're aware that there's a new thing that's on their backlog.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, to be honest, as a newish PM myself, I find it hard sometimes to keep track of all the new stuff that, because you get engineers that, for example, adding stuff to the backlog, and the stuff that they just add it into Jira, it just disappears to the bottom of the backlog. So having that process to review new stuff that's at the bottom of a pile that's potentially huge is sometimes difficult. But so normally people outside the team would come through the PM.
Yeah. And just on that point, Tom, if you're using Jira, I created a view that just displays stuff that's been created in the last week.
To be honest, that's something I've just done as a filter in Jira, which does actually help. Yeah. Cool.
And anyone want to talk about how work is currently allocated once it's with the team? How do you decide who's going to work on what? Someone who hasn't spoken yet wants to either type into the chat or unmute. Okay, let's move on to the last principle, which is shortening feedback loops. So again, this is probably not something that I really have to sell to this audience, but when I was a developer, if I coded something incorrectly and pushed the compile button and the compilation failed, well, it would take me a minute or two to correct it and hit compile and it would pass. So a quick feedback means you've got very little effort and it's easy to resolve. If I developed a whole feature, got it tested, got it built into a release, released it into production, and then the customer saw it and said, David, this is nothing like what we were expecting, well, then it's A, wasted a lot more of my time, and B, it takes me a lot more effort to resolve it. So, short feedback loops are always better than long feedback loops. And I think teams, or software teams, really need two kinds of feedback. There is the feedback about the product that you're building, and then there's the feedback about how the team itself is performing. And in terms of the product, I like to think of feedback coming from builds, from testing, from customers, and from end users. So builds, that's your kind of your automated builds and has it compiled and maybe run some static analysis. Testing, I see as kind of checking that it works as designed. So making sure that there's no bugs in the software, essentially. But then you also need feedback from customers and end users. And I guess it's worth thinking about what's a customer and what's an end user. Well, to me, a customer is the person or the group of people that have commissioned some software development. So they're the ones that wanted this software to be built. So this could be like a team of accountants and they want a new feature in their accounting package. The end user is the person or people who are actually using the software. Now, in the case of the accountants, that could be the same people. But in the case of something like Amazon.com, I don't commission features for Amazon.com, but I'm still a user of the website. And I think the important thing is to get feedback from both of those groups. I also, it's something we used to do on our team, and it was interesting because I read it in Steve Mcconnell's latest book. There's this near silver bullet, which apparently is practiced very infrequently, which is you put developers, everyone on the team, in regular contact with end users, like shadowing, you're going and working a shift as an end user for a day, that type of activity. And it basically always gives you improvements in terms of the people developing the software being able to get the features right first time. So it's, as I say, it's a way of making sure you have empathy and understand the end users. And it also, just coming back to the point of shortening the feedback loops, the point here is, it's much better if I do a screen share and do a little drawing to mock up a screen and say, is that what you had in mind, than that I build something and then show it to you at the end of a sprint. So again, sprint mentality can be, we do our demo at the end. Ideally, I don't know if that cough was to signify something, but ideally you would get your feedback as soon as possible about any decision or change you're making. If we look at teams, I guess the thing that most people are familiar with is having regular retrospectives, but also think of like your daily stand-ups. These are all kind of feedback loops about how the team is operating. And maybe what some teams do less is have slightly longer term sessions. So maybe every 6 months or every year, take a step back, because I think retrospectives can be a little bit kind of focused on the last 2 weeks or the 4 weeks, and then you can become a little bit tactical. And then, of course, the other feedback is collecting metrics. And the 4 metrics that were kind of, I guess most people know this, were published in the book Accelerate. And they're the metrics that correlate the most to improved business performance are these ones: elapsed lead time, frequency of deployments, change failure rate, and time to restore service after a failure. And then across those, I always think it's really good to have information radiators, and whether that's a Kanban board or whether it's a screen showing the current status of the build, psychologically having this feedback visible and on the screen and available for everyone is really important. And I still remember, I've not worked with a physical Kanban board for at least 2.5 years, but it was still having something permanently on display that everyone in the office could see is definitely very different to having something listed in a spreadsheet somewhere on a server. So that's covering the kind of the feedback you need. The other challenge that I think some teams face is you have your retrospectives, you decide what needs improving, but then you don't actually find the time to implement those improvements or make those changes. And I've got kind of 4 tips for helping to make sure that the things you decide you need to change actually get changed. The first is treat improvements as experiments. So rather than spending hours or days discussing what the right thing is to do it. If it doesn't work, stop doing it. And you have to be a bit careful, but most improvements can be implemented for quite a low effort and can be rolled back if you discover that they're not working. The second is choose manageable tasks. So I always think it's a bit lazy to say we need to, in order to do this feature, we need to completely re-architect our entire system to be cloud ready based on a microservice architecture. Okay, but that's probably not going to happen. It's much better to say, well, we could take this module and maybe make that into a microservice via a RESTful JSON API, or perhaps I could refactor this code just to make it easier, even though it's not going to be a microservice. But you find manageable tasks that you can implement. In the same way as you treat improvements as experiments, you also, if you decide not to choose an improvement to go ahead with, you shouldn't think of that as no forever. You can always come back and say, actually, now it does make sense to do that. It's just you're not doing it for now. And then my final one is always prioritize improvements that someone is willing to implement, because no matter what anyone says, no matter how much someone complains about something, if they're not willing to do something, spend some of their time fixing it, then it really can't be that important. So perhaps just wrap up that section with, again, a couple of coaching questions and see if any of you want to volunteer answers to these. So what methods you have for getting feedback from your end users, or how you choose which improvements to implement during your retrospectives.
On the retrospectives one, I don't think we choose which improvements to do. We have on our retrospectives, we have our list of actions to do as a result of the things that we identified that didn't go too well in the last 2 weeks. So normally that kind of gets divided up into the ones that need to be looked at because they're a blocker or something or around that. But then improvements just kind of, we'll raise a ticket for it and then we'll put it onto the backlog. And then when we get time, which is never, we'll pick them up. So yeah, I think what you just kind of said about, someone has to be willing to do them. I think the more interesting the improvement is, kind of helps to bring that up the backlog a bit more and kind of encourages someone to pick it up a bit sooner. And yeah, I think, yeah, it's a good point of what you said was about, if no one's really willing to improve it, then it's not really that urgent. It's not, it can live in the backlog and it can stay in the backlog and never get touched. But we don't have a specific process to prioritize those improvements that come out of our retrospectives. I don't know if you do, if you know of any,
I'm glad you mentioned it, Noah, because it ties back to what we were saying about prioritization, and that the backlog, often for a team, the official backlog isn't capturing all the work that they've got on. And I remember talking to Rich Mironov, and he's done some really great talks on product management and some books as well. And he had this rule of thumb where he basically said you should, in terms of the capacity you have on your team, 50% should be for your planned work, 25% should be responding to the requests that come in that you can't anticipate, and then 25% you should reserve for the process improvement stuff. And so it's, we were kind of talking about, you choose the 10 most, highest priority items, but sometimes it can be good to allocate some capacity. So you might say, out of those 10, 2 have to be, process improvement tasks, and 8 can be, product roadmap tasks. And again, the exact numbers don't matter, but some way, because what you've described also comes back a little bit to our conversation about the script to auto-delete old tickets. There's always a danger that you have all these suggestions for improvements and then no one ever does anything about it. And then, honestly, it's a complete waste of time talking about it and coming up with the improvement ideas if you never implement them. I mean, you may as well have a beer instead. It's it's not helpful just to write them down. Okay.
Yeah.
Just quickly before we move on. Oh yeah, Tuti's been waiting patiently with a hand up. So. Yep.
Okay. Thank you for this presentation. So the way we handle it on my team is that after the retrospective, the last item we have is the next step, and that is where we actually select one action item to take away for us to actually take a look at in the following week, because we follow the Kanban process. So what we do is that we raise a ticket for it on the Kanban board. We put it on the Kanban board, and it's owned by a team member. Sometimes it's such that the item we've selected to work on can be owned by the entire team member, by the entire team. And sometimes the maximum we can actually select is 2 items. The instances where we have 2 action items must be something where it's maybe the Scrum Master that have to action it, or the product owner have to action it. But if it is something collective or for the team members to actually do, then it's just got to be 1 item. And what happened is that as a Scrum Master, in the parking lot, I reminded team members that, what's the progress? Let's keep an eye on XYZ ticket then we also, as we go through our daily stand-up, it's a ticket that is in progress. So we talk about it. What have we done? And what's the progress? I mean, are we conscious about this thing and all that? So at the end because we're on a 2 weeks cadence, after that, then we move it, of course, from progress, we move it to done. Then when we go to the next retro, we sort of have our agenda such that after our icebreaker, the next thing we talk about is the progress or update from the outcome of the previous retro. So that's the way we run it.
And I think it's something I really like, and I used to do as well, is choosing one thing to improve and actually implementing it. And sometimes people think, well, only one thing when we've had all these ideas. But do you know what? If you do one thing every 2 weeks, it really adds up over the course of a year. Whereas if you have lots of ideas, but you never really implement them, obviously it doesn't. So that sounds really good, Tutu. I think that's a very, very good way of handling it. So if I just round this off now, I hope that if you look back at the answers that you gave to the questionnaire at the start, you'll kind of see the link between those questions and the topics and the strategies we've covered under these secrets of Agile. In the book, I kind of go into a bit more detail about quick wins and medium-term things that you can do in each area. And I also talk a bit more about Scrum and Kanban and how they implement these principles so that if you are having to adapt Scrum or Kanban or mix them both together, you can be mindful of whether you're still staying agile or whether actually you're kind of reducing their effectiveness. And we've talked about some of them during the session, but I also have a couple of chapters on some of the common anti-patterns or difficulties people face with Kanban and Scrum. So if you do want to reach out to me, feel free to contact me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Always happy to discuss these kinds of topics. I do want to thank you again ever so much for inviting me back. It's been really good. I know I was worried I wouldn't have enough to say, Tom, and now I think probably I should have cut a bit more material from it. So thank you all for sticking with it for such a marathon session. As I say, and I hope I get to meet and see some of you in person soon. So I'd love now to open up for any final discussion or Q&A that you want to have.
Just before we do that, David, I was just thinking to myself whether it go straight into Q&A, because we definitely want to have some Q&A, or whether we quickly do the draw just in case people do need to drop off. So I was going to propose quickly doing the prize draw for the book, and then opening Q&A up just in case people do need to drop.
Awesome, sounds like a good idea.
That sounds like a plan. And then we will do Q&A, because I've been astonished by the amount of interaction. It's been absolutely fantastic this evening. So thanks for all the engagement. I'm just going to share my screen again because we have got.
It's a good point, Tom. I think it was on my list and I didn't read it out. I was just thinking, thanks everyone for being so active. It does make a huge difference when you're presenting.
It is. It's great. It's been a huge amount of engagement.
This looks super exciting, Tom. I love it.
This is really exciting. Tim has frantically in the background been getting everybody's names in that put the names in the hat. So I'm just going to spin the wheel now, and wherever it lands, I'll contact you either via LinkedIn or via Meetup to get your address, and we'll post the book out. And thanks again, David, for donating a book to us. So here goes. There we go. Carlos.
It's Carlos.
Congratulations. Are you still with us, Carlos?
That's great. Thanks a lot. It was a great session with a great prize in the end. So it was totally worth it.
Awesome. Yeah, well done, Carlos.
Did you say it was in Portugal? It's a long poster.
Yeah, it's a long trip. I hope it's okay. It's not a dequalifier.
Yeah, no, that's all good. It's all good. It's Agile Northants global now. We're a global institution. So thanks for joining us, Carlos.
Thanks a lot.
All the way from Portugal. Great stuff. I'll be in touch either via LinkedIn or Meetup, and I'll get your address of where you want it to be sent to.
Thank you.
So if you want to stick around for Q&A, I'll open the floor back up. and you can take it away, David. Do you want to reshare just in case there's anything you want to go back to, maybe? Or you can leave it as we are. It's up to you.
I think at the moment, all I had was a slide saying thank you and Q&A.
Leave it as you are if you want.
Perhaps if I stop, because then everyone can see everyone, can't they?
Yeah,
which is
go for it.
probably a bit nicer.
Who wants to kick off? Has anyone got any questions?
Maybe I can start now that I'm excited. No, I'm kidding. No, my question is really simple, and I think it always generates a lot of discussion. At least when I talk about it, is just the program that you use for your backlog, right? So Jira, is it worth it to use like a specific software, or the idea of the organization is more important than the software itself? Of course, I see some examples here where you have like hundreds of items, but well, if you are talking about like let's say 20 items, is Jira worth it, or is team organization much more important than the software you use? For example, you could use, well, this is really old school, but Excel works. It can work, right? So my question is this one. What do you think, David and the rest?
So I guess my starting point would always be that tooling doesn't really by itself ever solve anything. So it's always about how you use a tool and how you apply it. And I say that, and I'm almost embarrassed to reveal this, but for my own kind of personal Kanban and task management, I literally have a list in Notepad, and I
love Notepad.
And I star I basically pick the top 3 things that I want to work on, need to work on, star them, delete them once I've finished, and then I look through the list. And sometimes there's a bit of reprioritization, but usually as long as I can see the top of the list, that's enough. And it's worked absolutely fine. I don't see a need to change that, but you could use Trello, you could use Jira. I mean, the principle is the same. On the other hand, again, coming back to Kanban, limiting WIP is a massive thing. I mean, one of the great things I think about having a physical Kanban board is it forces you to limit WIP, because you can't put 1 million post-it notes up on a physical Kanban board, but you can put 1 million, post-it notes into Jira if you really want to. So I think that's where, to me, I think it's important. There are certain things that you want. Again, I'm just thinking of where tooling is really good. Excel is great, but it's not an easy tool to manage workflows in. I mean, you can do it, but it's not what Excel was ever designed for. And I think as soon as you want more than one person accessing it, it all gets a bit tricky. Yeah. So I think
just yeah, no, I totally agree with that. It's just that the idea of these tools like Jira in the beginning were really simple, right? They were just to add the items. But right now, they are kind of losing the purpose of simplicity, because they have so many things that you can do that it kind of defeats their own purpose, right? So, yeah, but it's a great answer.
Definitely the biggest advice for anybody with any of those tools is do the absolute minimum. I even found an article from Jira themselves last year that said if you spend more than 1 hour trying to configure your project in Jira, you spent too long on it. So when I set up a Jira for a company I worked with a couple of years ago, yes, we had 5 columns or whatever, but you could transition any item to any other item. You could move done back to in progress if you wanted to, because you could. Whereas previous company I've just worked with, to get something out of done, if you'd accidentally put it there, required a change request, 4 layers of management approval. One of the companies I'm currently working with in ADO, the only way you have to push something all the way through the workflow to get it to go back a step. It takes 5 minutes to move something back 1 step.
You have to create a job like Jira manager, right?
Well, you end up as a Scrum Master being a Jira administrator, which is the standard on job adverts I've noticed these days. So yeah, I mean, if the tool, make the tool do the minimum you need to do to support the process. And if it's that's it. That's all you needed to do. So yeah, I would argue in Trello, if you've got a simple board, then Trello is more than adequate to do anything and everything you need. It's visible, you can share it. It means you can work online and remotely and haven't got to have a webcam on a real board or whatever. But yeah.
But also, because Carlos, you were asking specifically about the backlog, and it's maybe worth also mentioning, I don't know how many people have heard of discovery Kanban, but this is Kanban applied to how you build your backlog. It's different because with software development, you kind of want everything to move from the start to the end, whereas with discovery Kanban, the idea is that actually you want to discard ideas, so not everything that enters gets through to something that is in your product roadmap, but it's more of a technique for elaboration. But as I say, I think we're probably mostly agreeing here. It's start with how you want to work and make sure you get that right, and then honestly, the tooling should be a very secondary thing to that. I see Carla's also got her hand up.
Hello, hi, I'm Carla. I'm a little embarrassed to ask this question, really. Now, I'm not certified in Agile, but I have 17 to 18 years of experience in Oracle HR transformation. I'm currently working in Workday. So I understand what's been said today, what's been discussed today, David. Everything you've told us, I have experience in that. But what I am really looking for, and I'm lost, is so I have experience in Oracle. Started with HRMS, then when I worked on Oracle Cloud HCM. I'm in Workday HCM now, HRIS manager, HR transformation projects. What I'm really looking for is slightly come out of product specific. I don't really like working on Workday as much. What I'm looking for is have a broader experience as an HR transformation analyst or a consultant, self-employed, and work on success factors if I get a contract, right? Or work on Oracle as a functional consultant or a business analyst. I am a functional consultant. I have done a little bit of coding in SQL, but I was a long time back. What I'm really looking for, and I'm lost, is a good Agile course to do. A good course to do. I'm a bit lost. I've been looking at job sites, I've been looking at LinkedIn. So one thing, the first thing is, what course do I do? Secondly, what institute do I go with? I have the experience, and I just think that having these courses in my CV, I didn't have to in the past because my skill was in demand. But now I am looking at doing these courses. Any help from you, any suggestions from you would be highly appreciated.
So I'd love to give my answer.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm an expert in this at all. And then I'd love to hear at least a couple of other people give your answers and see if they're different. So,
okay.
And I almost hate my own answer. So I'm a big advocate for saying, don't slavishly follow one method or one process. And, Scrum isn't inherently better than XP or Kanban and all of that. But in terms of Agile methods, Scrum has pretty much won. So I kind of think if you're looking for a certification, then I would go for some Scrum certification. And I think that's you almost see it. Daily, I see Scrum and Agile used interchangeably now. And it's as a bit of a, because I like language to be used quite precisely, it does frustrate me because I think, well, Scrum is a way of implementing kind of team agility. It's not, Scrum isn't Agile, but actually if you're going to do one thing, I would probably get certified in Scrum in some level. But what do other people think?
I was going to give a similar answer, actually, David. I was going to jump to a similar conclusion. I was going to say even the Scrum Alliance, Scrum Master course, even if you're not going to become a Scrum Master, or you've got no intention to become a Scrum Master, my personal view is that probably any Scrum Master course, to be honest, but the Scrum Alliance one was one that I did, and I thought that was a great grounding. I've never been a Scrum Master, but it's been a great course to embed the fundamentals and principles of Scrum and Agile. So that'd be my answer.
Yeah, I think depending on what your needs are, I think Scrum gives you good foundational knowledge. I think I see Agile, and I've done courses with Adventures with Agile before that I've got an enormous amount from in terms of coaching. So that's another recommend.
What institute do you go with? Is that APM, or there's another one? Quite a few institutes that offer that. How do you shortlist what institute do I go with?
So, as Tom said, I'd go with Scrum Alliance. To be honest,
Okay.
I've seen this a bit, that the more traditional project management organizations, so APM, PMI, are pushing kind of agile project management training.
Yeah.
But I think they're trying to join the train, if that makes sense. That's not where I would, it's still not where I would look if I wanted to go on an agile training course. So yeah, Scrum Master. Also, I mean, but I think as a first step, it's not the right one, but getting in, you know, some of the scaled agile frameworks is another very interesting area, but you kind of need your grounding before you can move on to that, I'd say. Right,
so Scrum Alliance is what I should start looking at.
Yeah, but as Tom said, to be honest, I don't think the industry is quite at that stage of you must, I mean, it used to be like that Prince 2 certification was what you had to have as your badge if you wanted to be a project manager. I don't think it's quite like that, but I think, as Tom said, being able to say you are a certified Scrum Master, to be honest, certified by any body is probably the closest you get to that.
Okay. And then I was looking at Agile project management as well, but at a later stage.
That's a topic for over some beers, I think.
All right. Can I put in something?
There's still a huge debate about whether the whole philosophy of a project really has a place within product development and how that fits in with Agile. It's probably not one to start right now, to be honest. I see Tutu's also got her hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to chip in something. Maybe it will help her. So basically, there are several bodies that you can actually join up with to actually take the exam to be a Scrum Master. You have the Scrum Alliance and you have Scrum.org. That's the two major ones. And Scrum Alliance, you have a monthly you have subscription that you have to pay, not monthly, sorry. I think that is once in 2 years. And the Scrum.org, is a one-off fee that you pay for that. So, but one thing which I found out that on most recruiters' job specification, you see them asking or requesting for your CSM certificate, which is what you get when you go for Scrum Alliance, as against Scrum.org, which is a PSM. What you get from, as a Scrum Master certification is PSM. Then what David also said about not just limiting yourself to knowing about Scrum alone, then you can look at the Scaled Agile Framework, which is the SAFe 5.1, going for that as well, which will also serve you and help you to know how to actually be a part of a team on a larger scale as a Scrum Master. But you just take it one level at a time. And that is just what I can chip in. Thank you.
Oh, cool. Thank you. So Scrum Alliance to start with, and they have a subscription. And you said the certificate is what the recruiters are looking for?
I think you can find most information about it on their website.
On the website, cool.
I've done a fair amount of recruiting Scrum Masters over the years, and I definitely wouldn't discriminate between PSM and CSM. I would say I would look for one or the other.
It's the same content that they have, so you can go with anyone that you want.
As I say, I wouldn't discriminate one over the other. I think that they're both valid achievements.
Definitely.
Again, I think it's not the most important thing either. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't recruit a Scrum Master that didn't have either, which may be controversial, but I think there are people out there that are capable of doing the job without those